today about engaging your lay leaders in this process of revitalization and change, and in coming alongside you as you attempt to move the mission forward, as you attempt to revitalize your core setting, as you attempt to initiate change in the core. And I love this, this little cartoon that I think is quite hilarious, and I think hits pretty close to home for lots of us. We're hoping that you'll lead us on a journey of transformation without requiring any real changes. And I think we have a lot of leadership teams, a lot of congregations who maybe that's exactly where they are. We realize that something needs to happen. We realize we can't continue in the state that we're in, but we really don't want you to make any real changes in the way we do things. So that's, for some of us, the context that we're working in. And it's what we might be up against as we're attempting to initiate some change or to revitalize something that may appear to be dormant or complacent or even dying. And nobody really likes change. And it's never easy in any organization. Doesn't matter if it's the church or if it's in IBM or what Facebook is facing in these days. Change and transformation is never easy for an organization. And getting your team engaged, getting your leadership team, your core council, whatever you call the group that you work most closely with, it doesn't happen automatically. People are not automatically going to get on board with you. And growth and change never come easy. It's important, I think, for us to note as well that growth will never happen without change. But we also need to recognize that not all change leads to growth. So we need to be a bit strategic and a bit purposeful about what we're initiating and how we're attempting to revitalize and to move our core forward. I like this particular quote that suggests to us that leadership is the skill of engaging people in decision-making to bring direction and desired outcomes. Engaging people in decision-making. I'll give you a bit of feedback as we get started. What's your context look like or feel like? What are the challenges that you face in attempting to engage your leaders, or in a bigger picture, your congregation, in change or in revitalizing or getting on board with whatever it is that you're trying to do? Talk to me a little bit. If you're on mute, take it off and tell me, what are the challenges that you've experienced? Come on, Charlene, I know you've got some challenges.
Yeah, our congregation is fully aged congregation, so they're 70 plus for the most part. So change is not something that comes easy, or they probably just don't have the same energy to go about a change like they would have had 20 years ago. And yeah, the leadership board has been the same board for quite an extensive period of time. And we have been learning as we've been digging in the community that some of the leadership have caused hurts in the community in the past. So even with regards to change and bringing new people in, we've had a challenge with that as well.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Anybody else got anything to add to that list?
I think one of the things that we've experienced before has been around an internal focus. The congregation so focused internally that everything is great as long as it serves their needs. And whenever there's an attempt or a movement to kind of intentionally reach beyond our walls and engage those beyond the congregation, there's hesitancy, there's a feeling of being threatened that things are going to change. I think with some of that comes the old, we've never done it this way before kind of mentality around new things. And then I think in some places there's change fatigue that creates a challenge. People have they've gone from officer to officer or change after change after change, that when anybody comes in and suggests any kind of new change, that whole notion of change fatigue, and people put their heels in, and it's hard to engage the congregation or folks in looking at new ways of doing things.
Yeah, good point. That's very, very significant, very real, Peter. Yeah.
Just to underline that, I facilitated one congregational meeting where a gentleman literally said, we like who we are and we like the kind of music that we like. Why don't you just stop making us feel bad about that?
Yeah.
Right? It's very honest and upfront, and allowed some good discussion to happen.
Sure.
But it illustrates what Peter's saying, which often is a little bit more nuanced or hidden.
Yeah.
The congregation at Crossroads is kind of unique in the fact that they've been, in the last while, we've been out of the building, in a building. We're the third set of officers in the last 3 years, basically. And, so there's a lot of change that's gone on, but because it's kind of in a rebuilding mode, people are kind of expecting change, and it's there's not been a lot of resistance to change, particularly in the congregation as a whole. In the small group of core leadership, those changes have been slow, and you kind of have to, explain kind of the direction and work that process. But as we've been working that, and as we've been intentionally with the leadership, particularly the staff, helping them to get a vision of where things are going, they've been learning to embrace it more, and it's making certainly, and that largely Karen, who's there most of the time, has worked diligently with the team to kind of prepare them for the changes as they come.
Al, I think you touched on something really important, and when we think back to our first session together, where we explored and reviewed the congregational life cycle bell curve, I think there's a real sense that in the upside of that bell curve, when there's dreaming and planning and that kind of rebuilding that you're talking about, change isn't looked on as negatively as perhaps when they're on the plateau. Change on the downward curve of that bell curve, is more of a necessity in order to not die. Yeah, change or die. But in that rebuilding stage, it can bring that excitement that you're talking about. And I think when that's owned and when that's labeled up front, that in order for us to move from here to there, some change may be required. You can build excitement and ownership into that.
And I think the important thing is you're going through that process is to continue to explain the rationale for the change.
Yeah.
Not change just for the sake of change, even that whole change or die kind of thing. That's not a good enough reason. People need to understand the direction that we're going, why this change matters to the direction that we're heading.
And I think you can create something of a culture of acceptance for change. And that's maybe where you're at, Al, now with your situation, where, as you say, people are sort of expecting and anticipating. And certainly, Peter, you're right, on the upside of the bell curve, much more acceptable and embraced. And people are looking forward to what's the next new thing and the next new adventure. At the top, on the plateau, and as you move down the right-hand side, people are trying to hang on. So change is not easily accepted when people are trying to hang on to whatever they've got left. So until we get to the point of recognizing that something has to happen, change is a bit of a struggle. So the next side says moving your core from complacency to mission advancement requires, and there's five things listed here: engaging people. We need to get people on board, creating a sense of ownership, and Al, you made reference to that, where people are starting to believe in and anticipate that there would be change. Effective decision making that's based on fair process, and we're going to talk a bit more about that, and we've already referenced that, helping people understand why. Casting a compelling vision, And again, already referenced, if people know why and what the end goal is and what we're working towards and how this next incremental change is going to impact and help fulfill and help us reach that end goal, it's really important. And then effective outcome measure. We need to constantly be evaluating what we've done, how well we did it, and what we need to do differently as we move forward. So,
and I think those outcome measurements are always a bit of a challenge, depending on where you are in the life cycle too. You know, if you're on the downslope, you know, then certainly hanging on and plateauing a little while is sometimes a positive thing if you're not losing ground that you've been losing for a while. On the upswing, you know, you really don't want that to slow down. You want to continue. When you start to plateau, in some ways, that's a sign of slowing down and things not moving in the direction that you're still wanting to go. So, you know, a plateau at one level can be a good thing and another maybe not so good. So just trying to identify what those outcome measurements, and sometimes drawing the target before we shoot the arrow is really important, because you know, it's pretty easy to fire an arrow into a hay bale and then go and draw a target around it and say, yeah, I was right on, man, you know.
Exactly.
But
and I think we do that sometimes.
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge is identifying what those outcomes that we're anticipating or hoping for or praying for, what they are in advance, so that down the road we go back and we measure them against that first. I mean, you may see other outcomes that are positive and maybe unexpected, but you know, you need to identify what those are going to be in advance. I mean, the whole process of the mobilize review, the annual core reviews, and those kinds of things are helpful, but they're only, you know, measuring this, right? Although when you start to look at your goals, that becomes the part that you need to really spend some time focusing on.
Yeah.
The ones that have been identified in advance.
Excellent. Thanks, Al. I think one of the basic reasons why we sometimes experience resistance to change, and this is from George Bullard, but I like what he says in that some of the struggle that we have in managing change and some of the pushback that we get is because we're trying to help people get ready for something that they're not sure they need or even want, for that matter. And if people don't understand what it is they need or why they need it, it's pretty hard for them to embrace change. And I think for us as leaders, that's an important thing for us to keep in mind, that we're trying to convince people to do something that they aren't sure they even need. And many of them perhaps certainly don't even want. So it's important for us to create a sense of urgency in the most gracious and compelling manner that we can, to help people acknowledge what it might be that needs to be fixed, or what it is that needs to be advanced in our congregation, and helping them understand what it is they need or what it is they need to want. And James introduced me to this terminology just last week, describing the burning platform for our people. And we're going to talk about that a bit more too later, just helping to create this sense of urgency, or helping people to recognize that we're actually currently standing on a burning platform, and if we continue to stand on a burning platform, it's going to collapse and the bottom's going to fall out from us, and we need to be able to move on from here. And then interesting as well, and I was chatting with somebody yesterday, and they described this very point, but they described it in terms of helping their children make good choices or follow direction. And Peter, I know that with your kids you've done this as well. So that trying to give people some positive choices to make, rather than just a yes or no answer. I want to do this or I don't, but rather to give some options and positive choices that they can make. So it's not asking people whether we should paint the sanctuary or not, but rather asking them, should we paint the sanctuary blue or should we paint the sanctuary green? And that's just a frivolous illustration. But rather than giving options for yes or no answers, rather giving people positive choices to choose from as we move forward together. And fair process is very much a concept that's important and valuable for us to use in this whole process of changing. And fair process is a concept, you've probably are familiar with this. I might be preaching to the choir here, but just a reminder for us. It's a concept that builds execution into strategy by creating people's buy-in up front. And that's so important. If you've got buy-in up front, the change is going to run much more smoothly. And when fair process is exercised in a strategy formulation phase, people trust that a level playing field exists, inspiring voluntary cooperation during the execution phase. So fair process is made up of 3 significant components, and these are just a very, very brief summary. Engagement, inviting the collective wisdom of your group, asking people for their opinion, inviting people to speak into the decision-making process, that idea of getting people and allowing people to have a voice, and ensuring people that their voice is heard in the process of decision-making. People will very often follow through with something even when they don't agree with it, if they actually feel that in the process, my voice has been heard. My opinion was taken into consideration. We were on a level playing field so that my opinion mattered just as much as the leaders did. So that first step of engagement, and then explanation. Once the decision has been made and once you've taken a stand and you've created a clear direction, you got to make sure that everybody understands why. This is why we made the decision this way. This is why we're moving in this direction. We heard everybody's collective wisdom. We heard all the voices in the room or at the table. And based on what we heard, this is the reason that we're making the decision that we did. And then the last part of fair process is expectation clarity. Whenever you've initiated a change, in essence, you've moved the goalposts. And expectation clarity is all about accountability. It's all about making sure that everybody knows exactly where the goalposts are now and what is expected of them as we move forward in this new, with this new concept or with this new direction. So engagement, explanation, and expectation clarity. 3 really, really important pieces when you're initiating change, and we call that fair process. If we look to the scriptures, we can see a couple of very different kinds of models of visionary leadership and moving people forward. My apologies. First, from the Old Testament, we see a Moses model of leadership, where we essentially see one very strong, charismatic leader who is really taking the lead. And Moses was a strong, a confident kind of leader who heard directly from God and who communicated that vision to the people. And for the most part, with some grumbling, of course, but for the most part, everybody followed. And for Moses' leadership, for the first part of his leadership, certainly, it was a bit of a solo act. Moses received the 10 commandments, went up on the mountain, he heard directly from God, came back down, he communicated that new vision to the people, he challenged the people to follow, and they all moved forward together towards the promised land. That works for maybe 30% of us. And in order to lead in that kind of way, in that kind of a solo capacity, you've got to be a pretty gifted leader. You've got to have a very clear sense of the vision, and you've got to be able to cast that vision and to mobilize people in an incredible sort of way. About 70% of us, or maybe even more, struggle in varying degrees with at least one of those areas of leadership. And most of us will struggle to some degree with how we can get the team and eventually a reluctant congregation on board with change, with revitalization, with moving forward, with doing things a little bit different than perhaps we've always done them. A different kind, or a bit of an opposite style of leadership is a body life model of visionary leadership, which we find in the New Testament. I don't know if anybody brings their Bibles to any of these sort of things, but if anybody's got a Bible handy, just grab it so that we can read Ephesians chapter 4 in just a minute. This is a much more collaborative approach to revitalization, to initiating change. It's more integrated, it's more inclusive, more collaborative, and it's based on Ephesians chapter 4. Somebody have their Bible there, Ephesians 4, verses 11 to 16, if you wouldn't mind reading that for us.
So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so the body of Christ may be built up, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every aspect the mature body of him who is the head, that is, Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work.
Amen. So this concept, or this style of leadership, focuses on the various gifted believers' abilities and your ability and the corporate ability to equip one another for ministry, for works of service. It focuses on unity and on the maturity of the group and everybody growing up together rather than on the individual. So this is a style of leadership that's all about team. It's all about working cooperatively together. And I think there's only one mention in that passage that makes any reference to an individual, and that's right in verse 16, where it says each player plays his part. Each plays his part. And I think that mission advancement and revitalization is far more readily achieved through this body life process rather than any of us attempting to be a solo or an individual leader trying to do it all by ourselves. And when change and revitalization can come from the grassroots and when the whole body is working together, and when it comes through that fair process style of leadership, it's going to gain momentum so much more quickly, and it's going to have a far better chance of becoming the new norm. There's going to have some stickability, and that we're going to be able to see this through over the long haul. And I think an effective leader is going to focus on engaging and equipping and releasing the team to create the momentum and to have a much more long-term effect. I think that's probably even more important and relevant for us in the Army when we think about our move system. We think about some who are serving in short appointments, and you don't have a long time to make things happen. If you can build that momentum and that engagement in change and a desire for revitalization and an appetite for new ideas, if you can build that into the fabric of your people and your leadership team, then you're going to have a much greater chance of making revitalization, making change happen, and making it stick. So how do we effectively equip and engage our people in mission, in revitalization? John Cotter, some of you are probably familiar with his work on leading change. Cotter studied how the best organizations do significant change, and he suggests that it requires this multi-step process that can overcome complacency or inertia or obstacles or resistance, whatever it is that you might be facing in your particular scenario, whether it's that lack of energy or the hurts from the past or the change fatigue. Cotter suggests that we need to engage in this 8-step process. The first couple of steps that Cotter suggests, I think, are the ones that are most important for us. I want to just zero in for a few minutes this afternoon, because these are the 2 steps that I think can really defrost that hardened status quo that some of us might be dealing with. And the first one that Cotter suggests is creating this sense of urgency or helping people understand the burning platform concept. We need people to recognize for themselves that something's got to be done. It's one thing for us to come in and tell people that, but until they recognize that for themselves, until they embrace that for themselves, we're really never going to see much change, or the very best, we're going to have resistance to change. So helping people recognize that the complacency has to be torn down, the denial has to be combated, the status quo can't be the acceptable norm for us. The comfortable pew is not where we want to live and where we want to remain for the future. So helping people to recognize this sense of urgency, first step in helping people to accept and to embrace change. So tell me, what does complacency or status quo look like in your core setting? What does it look like? Or what does it feel like for you as a leader?
I think
in my setting, I would say that status quo looks like a certain level of disengagement. And there's a historical thing here where in previous years there was a small group, a ministry leadership team that did all the planning, all of everything was done by this very small group.
Nobody else had a voice.
Yep, and the congregation had very little voice, and activities and programs were presented like goods and services that you could kind of latch onto if you wanted to or not. And so that creates kind of, if left alone, creates this kind of sense of kind of disconnection or disinvolvement or inactivity, because that's just something that they're used to. For us, we're trying to be very intentional about broadening the ownership and having more involvement and all of those kinds of things, which is good, but it's not something that is something that they've had to kind of grow into that.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Peter. Charlene, were you going to add something there too?
Yeah, I mean, that's very relevant here in my context too. But we always hear the saying, well, that's the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. And we don't feel that it needs to change. Okay.
Yeah. So how have any of you, can you give us a little bit of experience? How have you been able to create some urgency, or have you? Any success stories or any attempts that failed? Give us an illustration on how you've tried to create some urgency.
I guess there have been times when we've, as a leadership team and mission board and all that kind of stuff is new at our core within the last couple of years, where the mission board has really grabbed onto kind of the foundational purposes of the mission board in trying to create and trickle down ownership and all of that kind of stuff to within and among the congregation, to tap into passions and dreams and all of that kind of stuff among the membership. So the mission board has intentionally taken, in some cases, a kind of a hard line stance and said, we're not event planners. We're not going to do this. We're going to, if it's going to happen, it's got to happen from within the congregation, to the point where there are some things that no longer happen because the expectation of the congregation was that the leadership were to do these things. And the leadership has said, but that's not our responsibility. Mm-hmm. That is the broader our responsibility as a congregation. And some folks didn't like it, but we've had to stand our ground on some things and say, yeah, no, it's if we're gonna have a community carnival for Rally Day that's gonna bring 400 people from the neighborhood, and we're gonna sink all kinds of money into it, we need to have congregational involvement and congregational interactivity with the members of the community. And we haven't had a community carnival for Rally Day for 2 years now.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. A a word of caution, certainly in my core experience, in every core that we've served in, we've initiated change and we've done things and we've moved things forward. But I'll never forget, and I probably learned this far too late in my leadership journey, as we were trying to initiate some change in one of our recent appointments, and trying to help people understand that we wanted to move forward, that we wanted to do something different than the way it was done. I had one of our senior citizens share with me with tears in her eyes, and she said, "Major, do you mean to tell me that everything we've been doing up till now was wrong?" And that was the concept that she'd taken from the way I was trying to initiate change. And that was a pretty big slap in the face, because no, that's not what I wanted to do. So when we're initiating change, I recognized, I think too late in the game, how important it is to honor the past and still create a sense of urgency that will help people realize that they want to move forward. Because no, everything that they had done in the previous years and in the years gone by was not wrong. It just perhaps wasn't as effective or as relevant as it could be in a newer way of doing things. So that was a leadership lesson that came late in the game, but that had a big impact on me. So we want to create this sense of urgency. We want to help people understand this burning platform concept and this idea that the status quo cannot be the norm as we move forward, because the world around us is changing so rapidly. Demographics are changing rapidly around us. Society is changing. People's thinking is changing, and the church needs to continue to be relevant to the people that we're trying to reach. So once we've created a sense of urgency, Cotter then suggests that the next step is building a guiding coalition. And as we think about building a coalition, I want you to start thinking about the people who are influencers in your core. Who would you name? And if you've got a little pad of paper beside you, start just jotting down some names. The people who are influencers in your core. And they're not necessarily on your leadership team. Not everybody on the leadership team is an influencer, and not all influencers hold leadership positions. But you have influencers in your core, and it's important for us to be able to name them, to identify them, and then to build this coalition with them. So just jot down 4 or 5 names on a pad of paper beside you there. The names of the influencers in your core. These are the people that you have to get on board, that you have to bring on side, and that you have to build this coalition, this guiding coalition with. Or if we put it in terms of the Big Brother show or Survivor, they're always talking about building strategic alliances and getting people sort of thinking and voting the same way that you do. So whatever terminology you want to use, you got to get your influencers on side. And you're going to have some people in your core who are spiritually passionate people, and they're going to influence because of their passion. They're spiritually passionate about the kingdom, about God, about the word, about evangelism, about discipleship. Those people are going to have a measure of influence. And then you're also going to have your power people, and they will be influencers by nature of their personality or by nature of the position that they hold in the core. And as you build this guiding coalition, you want to begin to connect your passionate people with your power people. Because once you can create that kind of a coalition of people who have a deep, deep passion for mission and for spiritual things, and people who have, by their personality or by their position, some influence, the power people, then you're really going to be able to start to move things forward. However you define your team, it has to include those who are ultimately going to set the course for ministry, and those who are going to play some key roles in helping you to fulfill that mission. So there's no point in any of us trying to rush on ahead and be this leader who's way out in front if nobody else is following, if nobody else is part of the coalition, nobody else is on side with you. No point in us trying to convince people to catch up and to follow if they haven't bought in to the coalition right at the beginning. So creating that kind of group solidarity, that kind of ownership is incredibly important, because any of us as a solo leader is never going to be able to make too much happen. But when we've got that coalition, when we've got some alliance with some of those influencers, the power people, the passionate people, we're going to be able to silence the critics and the voices of those who are discontent. So I want you to start thinking about how you can start to build that coalition and who needs to be a part of that. And those names that you've jotted down now, you're people who are spiritually passionate, and you're people who have power because of their personality or their position, are the people that you need to get on side. So important second step, and be thinking about how you can begin to do that. Straying a little bit now from Cotter's material, but I think the next thing that you need to do in initiating this change and getting revitalization up and running in your core is what I suggest just call esteem your team. And you're probably familiar with Jim Collins. He talks about getting the right people on the bus. Similar kind of concept. I like the way that Bruce Bugbee says it in his network material. He says you not only got to get the right people, but you got to get the right people in the right place at the right time for the right reason. And that's a pretty significant concept and goal, making sure you got the right people in the right place. So you might have leaders who are taking a leadership role, but they're not a good fit for exactly where they're leading right now. Make sure that they're in the right place at the right time and for the right reasons. So once you've identified some of these people that are a part of the guiding coalition, and once you've begun to formulate that guiding coalition, you've got the right people, right place, right reason, all of that sort of thing. Then you can begin to identify in your congregation who your innovators are and who your early adopters are. Innovators and early adopters, and you've got those in your congregation as well. And some would suggest, and again, this is George Bullard's material, he says that about 7% of your congregation would be innovators. And those are the people who are going to get on board with you first. They're the people who enjoy change, who always like a new challenge, the people who are always interested in what's on the horizon or what new thing we might be able to tackle. About 7% of your congregation is going to have that kind of mindset. And when you throw out a new idea, they're going to automatically start to think about how, yeah, I could be involved in that. We could do this. We could add that. I could contribute this. They're your innovators, and they're going to easily get on board with you. Another group of people that you're going to have in your congregation, probably 13 to 15% of your congregation, are going to be early adopters. So they're going to need a little convincing. They're not going to jump on board right away, but they're not going to be the resistant gang. They're not going to be the ones that dig in their heels. They're what we've referred to as early adopters, and they're going to join the team once you're able to convince them. Once you're able to explain it a little more, give them a little more detail, help them understand the rationale, help them understand something of the concept or the urgency. And if you can get early adopters and innovators on board with your guiding coalition or with your leadership team, Bullard says that you've got then about 20% of your people, 20% of your congregation firmly on side. And he said if you've got 20% who are tracking with you, he said you can almost make anything happen. So looking for those innovators, looking for those early adopters, and looking for those influencers. And those are the people that you need to begin to work with. It's not going to be the entire congregation. You're not going to get everybody. But once you've got a bit of a critical mass, 20% of your congregation, Bullard says that you can make things happen. So as you're identifying the right people, you begin then to introduce this concept of body life ministry and body life leadership. And you begin then to make things happen. And introducing this idea of body life, you want to begin to build an equal significance body, first of all. That's where every member and every ministry is vitally important and is equally important. So this idea of equal significance. The ushers are just as important as the bandmaster. And the children's ministry is equally as important as the music ministry. When we were in Regina, we had to do a fair bit of teaching and massaging to help people understand that our community and family services was just as important as our worshiping community, and to create this sort of equal significance within the body, and to help people understand that everybody, every ministry gets equal airtime, they get equal budget provision, they get equal celebration when something wonderful happens. So getting everybody on an equal playing field. Then we also want to create this interdependent kind of body where we celebrate how every member is uniquely gifted and how every member is essential to the whole body and to the whole part of the ministry and to the entire mission, where everybody has a part to play and everybody's part is important and everybody's part is necessary. And I think sometimes we have to relearn for people or reteach people, re-emphasize this concept of who I am affects who we are. And what I do affects what we accomplish and what the whole body is and does. And so helping create this sense of interdependence where everybody's part is important and everybody's gift is celebrated and necessary and becomes an important part. And then the last point is creating a unified body where everybody actively works for unity. And unity doesn't ever happen by accident in your core. It's something that is a choice, and it's something that's a process. And it's something that you as a leader need to constantly be emphasizing and working towards. And unity comes when we begin to esteem the we of the church and the mission above the I, above the individual. And we make sure that it's the corporate, it's the unity, it's the body that's important, not any individual part. And certainly when you're working with your leadership team, you want to encourage questions, you want to even encourage disagreement as you grapple through issues or as you make decisions, as you move things forward. But you want to make sure that once you step outside the boardroom, your leadership team, your core council is a unified front before the congregation. And when we begin to initiate this change and roll it out across the congregation. So any thoughts or comments on any of those points on building the coalition, creating a sense of urgency and esteeming the team? We're good. We're going to run out of time, so we're going to move fairly quickly. You might be familiar with Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. That's sort of an important part of building in those steps and keeping your team work together. I would encourage you to give a read to that book. It's very, very helpful in building an effective team. I think once we've got the right people, once we've built some trust, we've built some healthy conflict, we've got some ownership, we've got that guiding coalition and some of our innovators and early adopters on board with us, then we begin to see with new ears. We discover the vision within the group. We allow people to continue to have a voice. And we can move then towards the strategic vision and the strategic initiatives that we want to roll out. But I think it's important for you as a leader to be very careful to listen to the ways in which God is nudging and whispering in the ears of the people that you're surrounded by. Because I think almost everybody has something that stirs their heart, something that really excites them and something that they have a passion about. And sometimes you as a leader just need to draw that out. And people need to feel that their input, their contribution, the way in which God is stirring their heart is valuable as we move the mission forward. So yeah, I call this seeing with new ears, just using all of your senses to tap into where your people are and to help them create that kind of ownership. I don't think we should ever assume that God is going to give us the vision all by ourselves, and that everybody else has to figure out how they're going to fit in to what God has spoken to us. I think vision comes in a corporate way. Vision comes with some unity and with a sense of body life. And I think most people have something that they're willing to invest their lives in. And if you tap into that, and if you weave that into the mission and vision and the strategic initiatives of your core, you're going to have such a greater level of buy-in and a greater level of engagement. You'll be surprised at how quickly you'll be able to move that forward. So tap into people's hearts and get them contributing to the way the vision and the initiatives are being rolled out and moved forward. Once you've sort of done that, then you begin to develop the vision and the strategy, and you can begin to sense some clarity in both purpose and in process. And you want to always remain fiercely focused. I love that concept and that little couplet of words when we're thinking about vision and the direction that we're heading and what our end goal is as we move the church forward. We always want to be fiercely focused, because there's always going to be things that are coming in from the sidelines and trying to tap in to a place on the timetable, or to some of our attention, or to some of our financial resource. But if you are fiercely focused on an end goal and a vision for the future, you've got something by which you can measure. Does this fit in to our mission? Does this help us achieve the next stage or the next step in our strategic plan? Or is this just a distraction? And you've got a measuring stick that you can use to help you determine what you buy into and what you have to sort of just set to the side for now. So I think if we can follow some of that and grasp some of what I've suggested this afternoon, we're going to be able to come up with a compelling vision for our core, and we're going to allow people to be bought into it and be willing to move forward with it. And when we've got a compelling vision, it's going to facilitate the mission of the core. It's going to ensure a wide ownership, and that's what you need to move forward together. It's going to engage active participation from all of the members. It's going to generate the necessary resources. I absolutely believe that if we're moving towards a vision that we believe God has given us, the resources will come. Not sure how and when, but I believe that the resources will come. And it's going to confirm ministry and decision-making occurs at the lowest possible level, because you've allowed people buy-in, you've allowed people to have a voice, you've invited people to the table to speak into decision-making. And the more you can move decision-making down to that lowest possible level, people then feel ownership and feel that they're a part of and feel willing then to move forward with you. Last slide. When you've got an engaged leadership team, it's going to be willing to think strategically towards mission outcomes. They're going to be eager to set SMART goals. They're going to be accountable for the fulfillment of the mission, the achievement of the goals, willing to make the changes when they're necessary, and they're going to be using fair process in that decision-making journey. So if we're not seeing those things where we currently are, then maybe we need to take a few steps backwards and move back to identifying some of those influencers, some of those innovators and early adopters, developing that coalition, creating the sense of urgency, and then esteeming the team and start building towards an engaged leadership team. So thoughts and comments. We've only got a couple minutes left. A few, maybe one or two quick comments before Peter tells us about the capstone project. Any reaction? Sounds easy on paper. Maybe a little more challenging to put into practice on the front lines, in the trenches.
I think if you keep those things front and center as you're going through this process, though, it helps. Like if you continue to have the end game in mind as we're working through all the processes of change, trying to think of, you know, what are the things we want as these outcomes? Are we, you know, even looking at fair process, looking about kind of how we work change with our leaders and how we engage people in the change process. I think if you kind of have this understanding when you enter into it, too often we get rolling and you just want to see a few things start happening, but you've got to have a longer term perspective of things and not get distracted when it's not moving as fast as you might think, or when there's a temptation to maybe try to jumpstart something or short circuit something, but remembering that we want to keep the mission and the vision and our goals front and center and moving those things up. It can be really a temptation to not have the end game in mind all the time. And partly, I think one of the strengths of having a team is you can remind each other of these things as we go along. Absolutely.
Yeah. Important. Yeah. Having the team. I think the one thing that I want to leave you with is this statement that leading change and revitalization is never a solo sport. You need the team, and you need to keep them engaged. So Peter, on that note, Peter and James, what do you need to contribute to wrap us up today?
I think there's a couple of pieces that we're going to want to just highlight when we're going to send you some information, an email that outlines what we're looking for in as far as a capstone activity. Right now we're kind of leaning to using that very final time together through the video conference through Zoom on, I think it's the 28th of May. There's 2 video conferences in May, one early on to finish off the final session, which I believe is on conflict management. Is that correct, Doug, James? Yeah, thank you. So what we're really going to be looking for in the capstone is for you to do a little bit of thinking around your ministry context and identify a situation or an issue within your ministry context. I'm not suggesting that you're going to be looking at creating a 5-year plan of making all kinds of changes, but is there an issue that you can identify that exists currently that you can be applying some of the principles that we have been presenting to you in these Zoom conferences, whether it's utilizing fair process or engaging your leadership team or looking at one of the 6 or so revitalization pathway ideas, congregational life cycle, or even early in May at the conflict management piece. What principle, what idea, or couple of ideas can you take from what you've been learning in these or what's been presented in these Zoom conferences and apply to a situation that exists in your ministry setting now? And what we'd like you to do is come prepared to present a bit of your own pathway that you can implement and actually apply some of these principles and either move some small change forward or have a restructuring of the way your leadership team works. Anything that is going on currently to enhance leadership and ministry in your setting. Applying the principles that are here, and we'll look for some of the SMART goal kinds of questions: the why, what, who, where, how, in your presentation. Then we want you to come prepared to just give a synopsis of what the situation is and what are the ideas or principles that you're looking at using to move forward with in addressing that situation.
Another way of saying what Peter just said is that in our first session, we did the congregational life cycle and people had a chance to explain, well, I think this is where we're at. And so this is a chance for us to update each other and say, hey, here's where we think we've traveled, or where we are intending to head.
Right.
And it just benefits from the fact that this is a very engaged group. People tend to come to the Revitalizers cohort because they're working through stuff. And so we get a chance to share a little bit and learn from each other that way. That was my very vague way of saying what Peter said with a lot more detail and a lot more structure.
So we will finalize this and put it in writing, and we'll distribute it to the cohort so that you all have a little outline of what we're looking for. Just and even some samples. We'll provide some examples that can help get you thinking through the process a little bit.
It's always nice when you're assigned homework that you've already done.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your contributions. Thank you, Al, for being willing to sub in. And God bless y'all. And we look forward to connecting again on May 10th.
Thank you.
Bye, Charlene.
Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.